was the first person at the Graduate Theological Union in Berkeley to get PhDs in both art and religion and systematic theology. Two worlds that don't often intersect, not nearly often enough, but she has opened the door. She's an associate professor of theological studies at Loyola Marymount University in Los Angeles. Has a wonderful book, Bridge to Wonder, Art as a Gospel of Beauty. And one thing I love about that book is that she doesn't just give abstract theological concepts, but interacts with various pieces of art or art experiences or liturgical experiences, and kind of models the thing that she is doing. And we want to model that today. So we have invited several artists to share their work very briefly. My apologies to all the artists. What we're going to do is have our panelists in turn will present their work. Cecilia will give some response, kind of interact with them, and then at the end we will open it up to question and answer, participation by all of you. By the way, my apologies for the heat in this room. We've tried to get them to turn it down, but it's Saturday and no one's around or whatever. So if you're fanning yourself, we'll understand. So our panelists are in order that they'll be presenting. David Herwaldt, photographer and graphic designer, is professor of art at Wartburg College and an MFA grad here at UI. Chris Schwartz will do a vocal performance of Tangre Lingua, and he is a cantor at St. Patrick's Catholic Church here in town. We'll see a couple of posters by graphic designer and artist Dave Huth. Cecilia will explain that. He's not here. Steve Evans came from Pennsylvania, or was raised in Pennsylvania, and is a new MFA student and painter here at the University of Iowa. Bob deJonge over here is a photographer. He came all the way from Petoskey, Michigan to be with us. Full disclosure, he's also my brother-in-law, but you'll see, a fine artist. He's here because he's a fine artist, not because he's my brother-in-law. I want to make that clear. And Cecilia will also be sharing a few pieces from Peru. And without further ado, we'll get started with David.
She's going to project some pictures, and I'm just going to read a brief statement that I wrote this morning, prompted by a conversation yesterday at lunch and the lecture last night. At lunch yesterday with Cecilia and Ed and members of the Geneva committee and my fellow panelists, I had to do what photographers always have to do, describe their pictures when their pictures are nowhere in sight. And I attempted to characterize them with the adjective dumb. I tried then to explain that I meant the word dumb not as criticism, but as a kind of compliment. And I believe, or I fear, that my explanation failed. Musing over this brief exchange later in the day, I recalled something that one of my artist heroes, the writer James Agee, said in his introduction to Helen Levitt's first book of photographs, and it is a very great book of photographs, A Way of Seeing. He paraphrased Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, saying, Goethe wrote that it is good to think, better to look and think, best to look without thinking. Goethe's words likely came from Johann Peter Eckermann's book, Conversations with Goethe, which we know that Agee had read, and were for me a wonderful antidote during the 80s and 90s against the surfeit of so-called art theory, which privileged the disembodied mind over our very much embodied eyes. Wanting to be sure I was correctly remembering what Agee had written, I looked his introduction up yesterday evening and was delighted to see that I had indeed remembered it correctly, but was surprised to read the sentence preceding Agee's use of Goethe's words. I had never taken note of the preceding sentence, which had a curious resonance for me following Cecilia's stimulating lecture last night. A.G. wrote, "For although it would be foolish to hope that a purification of the sense of sight can liberate and save us any more than anything else is likely to, it might nevertheless do much in restoring us towards sanity, goodwill, calm, acceptance, and joy." And then the passage concludes with the words that I had remembered correctly. Goethe wrote that it is good to think, better to look and think, best to look without thinking. A.G. had been raised in the high Episcopalian branch of our Christian faith, but as an adult he had tried to jettison his faith, something it seems he was only partially successful at. He had led what most of us would judge a dissolute life, but could never quite shake himself of the belief that the project of each of our lives was the project of salvation. There seems to be truth in what Proverbs said, "Train a child up in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it." Notice how in the words just quoted from the book of Helen Levitt's photographs, A.G. suggests that he wants to believe that the purification of sight can liberate and save us. But perhaps more realistically, he goes on to say that all he really hopes for in the is the purification of sight, which he believes photography can do much to accomplish, and that his purification, well, won't quite achieve salvation, but might nevertheless do much in restoring us towards sanity, goodwill, calm, acceptance, and joy. Some years earlier in his great book, Let Us Now Praise Famous Men, A.G. expressed a similar sentiment in concluding his introduction. Beethoven said a thing as rash and noble as the best of his work. "By my memory," he said, "he who understands my music can never know unhappiness again." I believe it, A.G. said, "and I would be a liar and a coward in one of your safe world if I should fear to say the same words of my best perception and of my best intention. Performance, in which the whole fate and terror rests, is another matter." Purification of sight, liberation, salvation, sanity, goodwill, happiness without end, these are a lot to hope for in making or in looking at a few photographs. I would like to say that I hope for that much, but I must admit that I am, in A.G.'s words, a coward and a member of the safe world, and not steeling myself to hope for quite that much. More modestly, more fearfully, what I hope for in photographing is to maintain and perhaps to strengthen the faculty of attention. Simone Weil's famous phrase, "attention is a form of prayer," reminds me, however, that even so modest an ambition may still be regarded as part of the project of salvation.
Thank you for being here. I'm actually modeling something that for me is very important to do, which is the practice that encountering art is precisely that. It's an encounter. It's a relationship. And I have not seen these works. This is my first experience with them, as it might be for most of you. And that's a really important practice for us, that we need to, whenever we come into a situation where there's some creativity involved, and I like to think of art as an extremely expansive concept, because I do think that when we see a small shrine by the side of the road that's been left for someone, that is also art. And we can't just say the only things that are art, that's what's on the wall of a museum, right? So for me, it's a very expansive concept. And so it's very important then to just walk around exactly as David is reminding us to do through every piece that he's doing, which is walk around like everything is new, completely new. Just allow that experience to be your normal state. And think about that in terms also of the redemptiveness, right? That if the Spirit is in the world recreating and reawakening us every time, if we have a practice, as David has said from Simone Weil, of knowing that that is the essence of prayer, the attention is the essence of being present to God, because God is presenting us with surprises in every way. And the surprise is the fact that something, right, that may go unnoticed, as David's pointing to us here, suddenly can be transformed by our experience of it and by our engagement with it into something that's quite beautiful. And of course, with this very first one, right, we have something that appears so mundane, right, you know, the cracks on a wall. And David just points us then to the beauty of textures, the beauty of different kinds of geometrical patterns, the beauty of all of the things that come together, apparently haphazardly, and that we may not notice. And so I think that he's right in providing for us what we scholars call a hermeneutical key, right? A way to know what questions to ask of an artwork by telling us the key here is the idea of paying attention. So if you go to the next one. This, of course, I found particularly amazingly evocative for one reason, and that is something that I want to invite you to do, which is art helps us to understand other art. When we put art pieces in conversation with one another, and that's why we need to develop a broad spectrum of our loves of art, they start speaking to each other and speaking more. And so I'm going to invite you, when you have a chance, to go to look up a work called The Bleeding Border by an artist by the name of Sergio Gomez. And when I see David's piece in connection to Sergio Gomez's Bleeding Border, which I carry in here, they start doing something amazing together, right? Because David's giving us here this, first the idea of a wall, which when we think, of course, of the U.S.-Mexico border, is an overlying example, right? That's the main image. But here's a wall which holds something that may be now gone, an ideal, a form, a thought, right? And so by pointing out to us just the decay of certain ideas, the decay of some of what we may carry within us as always just kind of being an ideal thing that continues. Artists like David that point to us things that are decaying and that are disappearing remind us of the contingency of humanity and humanity's ideas and the ways we organize ourselves. So, you know, in the future, when I'm doing this again, it will be David's piece and Sergio's piece together, because I've just found something that I find profoundly evocative. You go to the next. This, of course, I found just profoundly whimsical, and that's where it took me. Now, this is also part of what happens, right? That everything that we bring with us now as we encounter an artwork is going to start relating to the artwork. So for me, orange ribbons and the movements here are very whimsical, right? But I can imagine someone who has undergone a tragedy where these things were set up maybe as some kind of a barrier. And for them, the experience would be very, very different, right? And David's not telling us what to experience. He's just telling us, here is kind of a gift. What are you going to do with it? So there's so much we can do. We've got a cross of roads. We've got a road that we can't walk on. We've got the barriers or the fun, right? So again, the power of art is that it begins this process of interpreting us to ourselves. Because when I look at it and I say, that looks whimsical, I have to wonder why. And then I remember my daughter's orange rain boots, right? And I start putting these things together in a moment of delight. So that part of us also gets to be awakened, not just to pay attention to what is around us, but what is inside of us. This, of course, is stunning, and I could just imagine it become a mural right there on that back wall, you know? And one of the things that makes me crazy as a university professor is the barrenness of our classrooms, right? Because we cycle through them, right? And so it's not any of our classrooms. And so the world, right, David's telling us, is just such a beautiful piece of artwork if we just stop and look at it. And what I love about this piece that I wrote with telephone poles is that a landscape that for someone like you who lives in this kind of environment may be very forbidding. For someone like me who lives in Southern California, it's just so really beautiful, right? Because I imagine snow, I imagine Christmas, I imagine all kinds of things. So our location, who we are and where we are, is going to really affect the way that we see a piece of art. Of course, this has multiple evocations that it can bring to us of journey, of aloneness, of solitude, of thoughtfulness. But for me, it's also very inviting. I really do want to explore that road, and I'm glad that he's taking me there. And then this, of course, I absolutely love. The first thing I thought when I saw it was, oh, this is magical realism. And how many of you know that what that is from literature, right? Magical realism is the kind of literature that we practice in parts of Latin America, and Latino writers practice in the United States as well, which is, you know, the real and the magical, there's really not a big dividing line. There really isn't. We have put it in. We think we understand everything and everything is logical. But if we allow ourselves, the magical is just all around us. And I think that that's a very important practice for people of faith. Because in Latino thinking, magical does not mean, you know, that you are going to go off and, you know, do some magic like, you know, with cards and stuff. It really means that the numinous, the spirit, the other is around us all the time. A better word would be enchanted, right? That the universe is enchanted. And our medieval forebears that we all share in our Christian history, if you ever walk into those cathedrals, that's what they wanted you to feel. The world's enchanted. And so David reminds us here, it's not just the stained glass windows. You may have a window right there that's doing the same thing that those medievals were trying to do, which was to remind you the universe is enchanted. And then, of course, this, which just gets us to, there's so much here to get us to stop. That's what this said to me, just stop. Notice the next time you're anywhere, and people go crazy with me, and I think some of these guys actually experienced this yesterday when we were returning from lunch. I stopped on a staircase, and I said, look at that leaf. And I made everybody stop, because that's how I do things. My children go crazy. They go, there she goes again. But it's this idea, right, that there's just so much around us that if we just take a moment, right, it's so beautiful and so inviting. And, you know, a piece of random wire on a wall that's been stuccoed. Really? Yes, David's telling us, really, really, it is.
Catherine, I think you should go to the last one.
This is the last one.
Oh, this is.
Yes. And so in Eric's wall, Eric's empty wall, the only thing that immediately came to me was obviously the whole idea of absence, right? Who's Eric? Tell me. I want to know. What happened to Eric? Why are all of his little thumbtacks still there, but there's nothing there anymore? And this could be an image of mourning. This could be an image of just the kind of thing we need to go through in grief as we lose someone we love, as we lose our place, as we lose our home. So also an extremely evocative piece. So I want to thank David.
Hi everyone. So I'm a cantor at St. Patrick's Church. I'm also a lecturer here in the Health and Human Physiology department. So I'm pretty used to projecting my voice in the classroom. So what I'm going to sing for you today is Pange Lingua Gloriosi. It is a Gregorian chant, and I picked a chant for a particular reason. I was asked to think of something that may be liturgical, and you can't really get more liturgical than a chant. And why did I pick Pange Lingua? Because it really is the essence of our Catholic faith. It really describes what we believe in transubstantiation of the body and blood of Christ. And as I sing for you, as a Gregorian chant, it is repetitive. And I want you to think about repetition as a mode of translating you into a meditative state, which can be very beautiful, and it brings your mind into a whole lot of different things. And it doesn't have to be a chant. It can be a prayer. It can be a mantra. Anything that brings you into a meditative state is prayerful in a way. And so I will sing for you, hopefully on key. Pange lingua gloriosi corporis mysterium sanguinisque preciosi quem in mundi pretium fructus ventris generosi rex ufudi gentium nobis natus ex intacta virgine et in mundo conversatus sparso verbi semine sui moras incolatus miro clausit ordine in supreme nocte cene recumbens cum fratribus observata lege plene cibis in legalibus cibum turbe duodene sedat suis manibus verbum caro panem verum verbo carnem effecit fitque sanguis Christi merum et si sensus deficit ad firmandum cor sincerum sola fide sufficit tantum ergo sacramentum veneremur cernui et antiquum documentum novo ceda ritui prestet fide supplementum sensum defectui genitori genitoque las et jubilatio salus honor virtus quoque sit et benedictio procedenti ab utroque comparsit laudatio. Amen.
I think I'll approach this differently, and thank you so much, Chris. I actually had to restrain myself from singing with Chris, because I know this completely by heart. And this is a question then that I put to you. Right? How was your experience of this? What experience did you have of this gift that Chris brought us. What happened? Yes.
I did my sabbatical at St. John's in Collegeville, Minnesota, and we like to go back there every. I did my sabbatical at St. John's in Collegeville, Minnesota, and we like to go back there every year for the Triduum. And I have not heard these words, but as soon as I saw it and knew the form, I knew. I'm not sure if the melody or the chant would be the correct word, but it started me singing or humming that in my mind and took me back to those experiences at St. John's.
Okay, so immediately you connected. But she used a word here already, right, that maybe we don't even know what that means. What is the Triduum? Right? So part of what experiences like this can do for us is that, in this case, they reintroduce us to actually something from our tradition that we may have pushed aside, forgotten, not even brought into. But, Thomas Aquinas way predates the time when we broke up, when Catholics and Protestants decided to go our separate ways. So in many ways, he is generative for all of us, right? But what happens is that we were having this conversation at lunch yesterday, that part of what happened as Christians broke up, first, with our eastern part, our eastern lung, and then among ourselves in the West, was that our symbols, right? Our music, our architecture, our images, all became ways for us to define ourselves as me or you as you, and what divided us. And the beauty that was there to begin with, and that we found so evocative for all of us, right? Some of us said, well, I'm taking the stuff on the walls. And some of us said, well, I'm taking the word. And we broke up in a really painful divorce where our home got kind of decimated. We lost things from each other. What we can do when we have beautiful art, like what we have here with this chant, and the Triduum. And the Triduum is the actual going through the liturgy of Holy Week, right? And it begins on Holy Thursday. And this is so ancient. It begins with the Desert Fathers. Ancient. And on Holy Thursday, the whole remembering of the Last Supper. And then on Good Friday, right, which we, in Spanish, we call Viernes Santo, Holy Friday. When we remember Jesus' walk to Calvary, and we remember his crucifixion, his agony, his community around him. And then Saturday, when the church really stops, just stops. In my own tradition as a child, at that point, there would be no music in the home. There would be no laughter. In earlier times, things would even be covered with black, and some communities in Europe still do this. They cover objects of plenty with veils, because on Holy Saturday, everything stops. Jesus is in the tomb. And then on Sunday, right, on Easter, we have the complete renewal of all of creation in him. Triduum, the 3 days. And we have lost it, some of us. Or some of us do it very, very poorly. And by that I mean some of us Catholics. We don't know the history. We don't know what it all is about. So an encounter like this is going to help us to kind of say, well, there may be things in the ancient traditions of the church that maybe we should look at again and see what they can bring to us again.
Thank you. It's not many theologians who actually inspire art, but Cecilia has done that. So we're going to look at a few slides of some art. And Cecilia, maybe you just want to tell us about them, please.
Well, actually what happened is Dave Huth is an artist I don't know, and this is about the third or the fourth piece that I've had artists contact me about that have come about as a reflection on the kinds of things that I'm trying to work us through as a community. And so Dave is an artist in New York. We don't know each other, but he heard an interview with me on a podcast that, if you don't know it, I would really recommend. It's called Homebrewed Christianity. Homebrewed, you know, like homebrewed. Homebrewed Christianity. The podcast is run by these amazing young theologians, young doctoral students that just really want to kind of get everybody just into this profound conversation that at the same time is really, really fun. And they want us to notice this. And the same thing happened with Dave then. Dave was listening to the podcast, and then he writes to me an email and says, Cecilia, I just heard this podcast, and I've never met you, and actually I'm really new to your work, but wow, can I use your words? Is that okay? Can I tell you that I'm now doing some art in relation to what you said? And so this is what I talked about last night, my whole idea that glamour is the opposite of beauty, not ugliness, right? And, my words there is that we can see in this bleeding man the most beautiful image that they could be. And that's very different from the kind of beauty that's sold to affluent and comfortable people. What is the opposite of beauty? I ask. People take very little time to blurt out very quickly ugly. But theologically, I would say that the opposite of beauty is not ugliness. And then he gave us this wonderful kind of Las Vegas kind of image there. The opposite of beauty is glamour. Glamour is so much more dangerous, so much more the opposite of beauty. Ugliness doesn't attract us. It doesn't entice us. It doesn't make us want to follow it. Glamour can't do any of the things beauty does, so it can't have a fight with beauty. Glamour pretends to be beauty, and then it ensnares us. It calls us to itself, it makes us want it, and then it turns on us and shows us its emptiness. If you want it. What's really interesting too about Dave doing this work was that, he's not a Catholic, but he knew that my setting is Catholic and my own sensibility, so he's using a crucifix to kind of connect to me in his graphic, kind of very postmodern design. And then I talk about also the idea that the ugly can be redemptive. And Dave has a wonderful website, so if you guys Google him, Dave Huth, you'll find this. And this is called the Art and Justice series. And so my thought here, which he captures so well, is that the wound of the ugly can move us to action, right? The ugly isn't the opposite of beauty. It's the absence of beauty. And just like we saw with David's image, and now see how we're relating different artworks, right? With that empty wall, right? The absence speaks very loudly. And so when beauty is missing, as we see here with all the trash and the ugliness of something like this, when that's missing, then something should awaken in us. And that awakening is for us to pant after, search after, want, chase beauty, and then do whatever it is that we need to do to make this back to beauty, to take it back to it. So obviously, one of my central points is that ancient idea that comes from the tradition so far back. And it's the idea that beauty, truth, and goodness are always united. Always united. And that when we can't really locate truth, when we feel everything is kind of messy and around us and we can't really tell, well, what's true? If we look for beauty and we look for goodness, the truth will show itself to us. The same way when we can't figure out what's the good here. There's two competing things. Which is the good? If we look for which is the beautiful, it will point us right back to the truth and the goodness. So keeping these together all the time, asking ourselves that question, will help us to live what, the purposeful life of a Christian is to be, to create, to represent, to always enliven the truth and the goodness of God's love. If we look for the beautiful, it'll help to point us.
And now Steve will share some of his paintings with us.
Thanks for coming. It's great to be here. I'm really glad to be here. I have to apologize ahead of time. I have kind of a sore throat, so if my voice cracks like a prepubescent boy, I don't normally talk that way. But yeah, I'm glad to be here. This is a great conversation to be having, and I think it should happen more often. What I'd like to do is just kind of go slide by slide and just kind of talk about the pieces, how it relates to where I am right now with how I'm thinking about art and the art that I make, and how it relates to these things that we've been talking about today, last night, and so on. So this is a piece that actually got finished recently. It's a print, and I've been kind of working with these film stills from cinema, which recently I realized has had a larger impact on my life. And a big part of it is kind of reconstructing narratives within narratives. And for instance, this one is, does anyone know where this is from? Close Encounters of the Third Kind, right? So this is the scene where Richard Dreyfuss is stopped at train tracks, and this spacecraft is coming over, and he looks up, and then this really brilliant light comes down, and he actually gets sunburned on one half of his body. And so this stripe is kind of pointing that out. And so there's this kind of relation between, it's titled Passover. And so, these are things I was just kind of realizing after I made the piece. What I was interested in initially was in the printing process, you have, especially for this plate that was printed with, you have your page, and then you have your plate that goes on top of it, and then it goes through the press, and in this process, this thing that's below and the thing that is above, they're both kind of becoming one in this process, and the celestial thing, the above thing, is leaving a mark on the thing below, right? So if he's got this sunburn, there's this mark, there's this celestial thing that's leaving a mark on this earthly thing. And so I thought about Passover and the marking of the blood on the door, right? And the thing that struck me about that in relation to Christ and salvation in Christ is that it wasn't the people inside that saved them, it was the blood on the outside, right? So having Christ's blood on you through salvation is what saves you. It's not who you are to begin with. So we can take the next one.
There's the other pieces on this.
Oh, yeah. So this is kind of like a series of paintings I did where the wall is incorporated. And so this idea of being and presence has come up a lot just in the lecture and our conversations at lunch yesterday. So this is a time when I started to question about this idea of being and what the German philosopher Martin Heidegger would call Design, being with a capital B, or in translation, being there, or presence, right? So in this situation, and we were talking about relationship too, is where does art come from? In other words, there's this other philosophical proposition. Why is there something rather than nothing, right? So I'm thinking about the relationship between the wall and the piece. You know, I think the wall is a lot of times something we take for granted. So in this case is, you know, the paint actually goes onto the wall from the canvas. So is the piece taking part in the wall, or is the wall taking part in the painting? Do I ask God to be a part of my life, or do I ask to be a part of His life, right? And so a lot of this is about space, how we exist in space, our awareness in space, and our presence in space. And so this is a larger one. This one does not go onto the wall, but it brings attention to the wall and the fact that these are two canvases that have a space between them. And the horizon line for me has been a big part of my work because, like the print, you know, it's a place of separation, but it's also a place of joining. So there's this kind of dichotomy happening here. And to where the space in between these panels, you know, there's this bright pink color, and then actually on the inside, you can't see it from here, but there's a fluorescent orange. So this space between these panels, where it's divided but also comes together, is highlighted. So this is a site-specific piece that I did for a friend of mine. She actually made awesome creme brulee for our wedding, so I felt like I had to compensate some way. So this piece is called Salt and Light, and this room that it was specifically made for didn't really get that much lighting. The light it had like one window, and so I'm trying to think, what can I do to put into this room that will be meaningful, that will use this room in a specific way? So the paint is actually iridescent, so it's kind of sparkly. It has like a shine to it. And the thing about this piece, and it kind of reminded me of salt, and the way that salt can be, you know, reflective and kind of crystal-like. And the idea of salt and light, and you know, in Scripture it says that we are called to be salt and light for the world. Is that this piece helped to harvest the light that was there in the room. So, you know, it reflects, and whatever is there, it draws it to itself and then points it back out, right? So, in this sense, this piece could be salt and light in a room that didn't have much light to begin with. So these are some neon-colored paper pieces I did that are actually kind of small. They're 12 inches by 12 inches, I believe. And the thing I like about neon, besides the fact that if any of you are up to snuff on painting today, it's very popular. That's not the reason why I did it. But so neon has this incredible quality, again, speaking about light, that it not only absorbs light in a really brilliant way, but it also reflects it. So it's not just about receiving something, but reflecting it back out again. And again, we have this idea of the horizon line, and this idea of joining, separation, and so on. And then so here again, is an example of where I've been working with film. This is actually two film stills that are put together in the art world we call juxtapose, is one thing put next to another thing to make a comparison. So this is from a film by Ingmar Bergman, who was a Swedish filmmaker, and most of his films can be kind of dark and existential. And in this case, the plot for this film is this psychological existential issue with this one patient who is undergone a kind of trauma to where she is kind of divided inside. And so there's this idea here of going in and out of light and darkness, and with the philosopher Soren Kierkegaard calls being of two minds, which is, again, there's this dichotomy of being separated inside, right? So so at 1 minute the woman is in the light, the next she's in the dark, and throughout this series there's this constant thing that keeps happening. She's in front of the light when it's off, and then it's on, and then so there's this idea of being of two minds and struggling with anxiety or doubt or fear in certain ways that he refers to in this sense. And so it's just putting these together and kind of being aware of this thing. So, thank you.
With Steve's work, I'm not going to go through it, but I'm actually going to just talk about my perception of him as an artist, as where he is right now. Because we've got just so many recurring themes in him, and as a young artist, I think that there's a spiritual struggle that he's letting us in on, and it's a struggle that's part of his generation, and maybe of all previous generations. It's just that today it may just be so much more available to us because young people like him, like you, have the chance of making art, especially of working with visual culture in ways that was so laborious and difficult for earlier generations, right? I mean, even for myself, when I was doing my film degree, and so I love the fact that Stephen is using so much of the film language. We didn't have the kind of nonlinear technology that's available now, and it's all digital and all that. I mean, that was happening, but my film school insisted that we use film and that we use the tactile thing itself, and that we spend time trying to put it together, putting it through the process of bringing light through it, using an old-fashioned moviola that should have been inside a museum. Well, they had like 12 of them that they made the film students work with. So this idea that today we have the capacity to explore this kind of thing with just our wonderful, in my case, a MacBook Pro, but my students will tell me, "Oh, Professor, I think I'll do a film for my project." And I think, okay, that used to take so much time and money, but today you guys can do it. So Steve has this thing that's happening, I see in his work, and he's kind of letting us in on a struggle between the idea of light and the immaterial quality of it, right? And some theologians say that light is God's simplest of creatures. And light as the celestial, as that which is clearly beyond us, but is searching for a relationship with us. And so then he's got this materiality, right, of the wall and of the canvas and of the paper and of the paint and of all of these things and of the film and of the process that put that immaterial in some kind of a connection with the material. And that's one of the gifts I think that artists give us, that they tell us, what's beyond us is actually here. There's a relationship. There's not, and his whole idea of horizons and dividing lines and separations, not really actually. Maybe just somehow a little bit, but not completely. And even with this, there's a veil, kind of a curtain in the scene. The idea that we step behind the veil, move forward on the veil, right? So going back even to Pangelingua, right? The enchantment of the world, the joining of the celestial and the earthly, the fact that maybe we're not so separate at all. And so in theological language, we say, well, we've got here in all his work kind of a dialogue between immanence and transcendence. Immanence and transcendence. What's here, what's there, and how do they relate to each other?
Thank you. What Ed didn't tell you, yes, I'm his brother-in-law, but I was coming here just to visit my sister and my brother-in-law, and he says, hey, Bob, I think you ought to present. This was yesterday afternoon. So, okay.
You can do that to your brother-in-law.
Yeah, he coerced me into being up here this morning, so I don't feel totally prepared, but I will share a little bit about me and what I do. A year ago, I was privileged to go to Edinburgh, Scotland, and spend some time there. And it happened to be December, so it was not the nicest time of year, but it was still beautiful. And I've been photographing for a long time. I've been using the camera for 30 years, but before I went on that trip, I decided, I need to break away from some of the things I've been doing. So, so often as a photographer, you have this thing, this mechanical thing between you and your subject. You have this thing that you stick in front of your face and you take a photograph. I decided to eliminate that part of the process, and I just took the camera and shot from the hip, literally, and started taking pictures as I walked down the streets of Edinburgh. And in this particular piece, there was this couple in front of me, and they were walking arm in arm, and I just started snapping away, and I don't think they were aware of it, but longer exposures, took some interesting shots. This one in particular, just the caress of this person's arm. It wasn't about their intellect; it was a physical connection. And what really intrigued me, after a lot of times you see things, of course, after you get the images back and start playing around with them. Way off there on the right, you see this girl just kind of peering around and looking at the couple. And I just thought that was fascinating. This is, I'm inspired by nature. Nature is a huge part of my life. I live in northern Michigan because of the setting there. And Lake Michigan is huge for me. The lakes really inspire me. There's something about that massive body of water. And I'm a collector. I'm kind of a hoarder of images. I just take lots of images, store them on massive hard drives, and sometimes they come together. This is, most people think, well, this is just a nice picture of an event that happened along Lake Michigan. Well, it's actually two images put together. The sky was taken a year or two before this, and then the water. And I just saw this angry sky. It was an incredible sky. It was when I was doing an artist in residency at Sleeping Bear Dunes. I've done 5 artist in residencies at national parks. And it stayed in the back of my mind. The lake, the picture I got with that cloud scene just didn't work with me. And a couple years later, I was able to capture this wave rolling in, same kind of lighting situation. And all of a sudden, the cloud piece came back to me and said, yeah, this is the piece that needs to go with the wave and the storm. This one I'm still trying to figure out, but obviously there's the cross here. And, I definitely believe in gifts. Like I said, I've done 5 artist in residencies at national parks, and it's a real honor to be accepted into programs like that. And I was, just to share with you, I was accepted into a program in Isle Royale, which is this remote place out in the middle of Lake Superior. And I used to feel, not as much anymore, thankfully, this real anxiety. You're accepted into this program. You got to produce something wonderful, something great when you're there. And I've learned that if I just relax, sit back. The gifts will come. God will present these gifts to me. I don't need to, be actively producing something, just right away. Especially I think it's with a photography. It's really easy to just start clicking the shutter. But I found that if I just sit, find a stump, a rock, meditate for a while, something will appear. And I was shooting out. This was at the state park in Petoskey. I was shooting out at the lake and the typical things I like to shoot. And as I was walking back toward the parking area, past this playground, this was in winter, and this just struck me. A piece of playground equipment becomes a cross. Something about can, the cross become something that's played with. Anyway, fascinating irony, I think, in some ways. This is again in Edinburgh, and I'm a person who, I get bored easily. I like to try all different styles. I mean, I love art history. I love the things of, the surreal and the impressionist and so on. And I play with all those things. I think I'm a kind of an eclectic person when it comes to things that influence my work. And this was just walking down the streets of Edinburgh, and beautiful facades there, beautiful things. And I just took some pictures. And this was actually right near a place called the Elephant House, which is where J.K. Rowling started writing Harry Potter. And and right next to that was this beautiful street. We were on this bridge looking down the street, and I just thought, well, I'm going to replace a couple of the windows with a street scene that was close by here. And it's just like this place brought me into another world. And that's what I kind of wanted to express here. This is one of my favorite places in the world. This is Sleeping Bear Dunes. If you've ever get the opportunity to go up there, it's up in the northwest hinky part of Michigan. And beautiful, beautiful place, beautiful dunes. And this is just an impressionist piece that, again, something about the water there, that huge body of water, that it affects all our lives. It affects, if you've ever been to Michigan, there's incredible snowfall in the winter just because they have something called lake effect. The wind picks up that moisture and drops it and creates these beautiful storms. That's just and again, like I say, I'm a collector. I collect images, and somehow at some point they all seem to kind of fall together and come together. This was, again, at Sleeping Bear Dunes. There's some beautiful old homesteads there. And I walked into this corn crib, this empty corn crib from an old homestead, and just took a few pictures in there, and walked to some buildings next door and took some pictures there. When I got home and started looking at the image, I saw that these beams in the back of the corn crib that formed a cross. I thought, there's something here going on here. And then I took a picture of a wall that I had encountered there at the homestead, this homestead, which had a vine growing on it, and put it on the floor. Something about the vine, and it took maybe a year before I came up. You know what this is? This is something about storing up for yourselves treasures, and so that's what I titled it after. I also did an artist residency at Petrified Forest in Arizona. And for a guy from northern Michigan who's used to a lot of trees and the lake, this helps you kind of think outside the box, to go to someplace different, someplace new, where you are given a gift that you're not used to. And I was just sitting on the edge of a cliff, actually, watching the sun come up in the Painted Desert, which is part of Petrified Forest. And just the beautiful hues. It was one of those mornings where there's just a slit of light on the horizon and clouds above it. Just created beautiful, beautiful colors. And one thing I was so impressed with the Painted Desert was the layers of everything. layer upon layer, and it just, for me, it called to do something more abstract. And so I just pulled all those colors out and created a kind of a tapestry of color here. And as I was walking back to my little cabin that they gave me to stay in, there was just this beautiful little moth that just sitting there on the wall. And for some reason, I felt like I needed to bring that into this light. Something about a moth and light, how they're attracted to light. So, thank you. I think that's it, isn't it? Oh, one more. This is a more classical piece. Kind of, again, I went black and white, I went classical, kind of Ansel Adams-ish maybe. Like I said, I get bored easily. I try all sorts of things and different things. Again, Sleeping Bear Dunes, one of my favorite spots, very inspiring for me. And what happens at Sleeping Bear Dunes is often vegetation is covered over by the dunes. The dunes shift dramatically. Things change very dramatically there. They cover over vegetation to old trees, and then they uncover them. And so you have these pieces of wood that have been covered for probably centuries, and then uncovered again. And I just couldn't resist. I saw this cloud that was doing this zigzag right over top of this piece, and it just, it's more a graphic thing for me, but I think also has a very spiritual nature to it. So,
Well, I think one of the gifts that artists give us is exactly what Bob said, and that is this restlessness that they have. He says that he gets bored. I call it just the restlessness of creative people, that they're always so aware that there's just so much going on. They remind me of my son when he was 3 years old and he didn't want to go to sleep because he didn't want to miss anything, right? And it's this kind of idea that the world's always just so new. And in his work, you see this constant idea of shifting, right? Of things are transforming. They're happening. And you also need to recall them, remember them, bring them together from all kinds of different experiences, right? So he's questioning the idea of time, right? And it's what's apparent to us is it's a movable nature, right? This happens now, the thing happens next. And of course, in the Christian liturgy, and I like how he said, he felt this was so spiritual. In the Christian liturgy, there's this whole idea that time isn't what we think it is at all, right? We have this idea of the kairos, the God's time, and that the time is intersecting. And it's fluid, and I always have this image of the actual moment as a Roman Catholic of the consecration as a moment when earth and heaven just open up, and something happens between them, which transcends time, transcends place, transcends all of the things that we think are fixed. And I think that's one of the gifts of Bob's work, is that by pushing so many different boundaries, right, in what he's doing, he's reminding us of just the fluidity and the dynamism of experience, and that, I love just making myself aware that I'm a tiny, tiny creature on a tiny, tiny planet, on a tiny galaxy, on a tiny part of many, many galaxies, et cetera, right? And if we do that, then we realize, boy, can you imagine just for 1 second how much we just don't understand? And I think art, and Bob's work is a great expression of it. Art gives us this humility before the immensity, right? And he keeps bringing attention to that for us, keeps making it present for us and inviting us, because work like this invites us then to engage ourselves in that dynamism ourselves, and to sit the next time that we walk somewhere and see, oh my God, what just happened? What was that? Where did that come from? What did I see, right? And of course, our own location, right? Because as he was talking about his piece of the not storing the treasures, right? This one, right? I was having a whole other thing happen to me, right? I was just like, oh my gosh, look at that. This is about the resurrection. And look at that, look at that butterfly back there. And then the tomb, and the tomb's opening up. And the butterfly, and all this stuff's happening in me, right? And so this is one of the things that I want to commend to you, that bringing art into ministry, into teaching, into anything that we're doing will open up every one of us to all of these things that begin to happen inside of us. And so I want to thank Bob as well, and all of you guys, just so amazing work. Well, as we had been talking about doing this, I thought I would bring because one of the things about art is that as gorgeous as it has been for us to see these pieces, other than the music, which of course is completely ethereal and disappears in that moment, we don't have a tactile experience, and art often needs that. So I have 3 pieces from my own art collection that I'm going to give you first where they come from, and then I'm going to invite you to have a relationship with them, and I'm going to actually pass them around and have you touch them. So I had some images, but unfortunately my computer was acting really weird this morning, so I couldn't get them uploaded. But if you imagine a mountain, very high mountain, which is only made up of gray dirt. That's all there is, gray dirt. There's nothing, no trees, no colors, nothing. And then on that mountain, what you have are little dwellings put together with the leftovers of civilization that the poor can find. Here's a piece of cardboard, here's a piece of wood, here's a piece of metal. And that's how we get shanty towns in many parts of our world. We get these slums, these favelas. And so in Peru, on the mountains, outside of Lima, there's an area called Pamplona Alta, where these communities live without running water, without a tree, without anything but each other and their faith. And what I bring you here is the work done by the women of that community, and how it is that they see their world as opposed to what it appears like. So when we talk about faith, Paul tells us about this idea of faith being our belief in something that isn't seen. Not seen like this, but seen like this. And these women live by faith. They live by faith. They live by an understanding that the living God does not will for them to live in this squalor. Many of their families come from the jungles, the verdant places where there's no work, there's no food, where they're being pushed out by development. They're being pushed out by agricultural giants, world agricultural multinationals who are tearing down the forests. And they end up in the shanty towns of the cities. but there's a memory in them. And the memory then gets put into the art. And as I pass it around, I want you to feel it. The women make these with scraps. There's a ministry that I'm happy to give you all any information about. It's called Convida, Art from the Americas. And this ministry goes down there and helps to mediate getting lots of fabric scraps from lots of places and then giving them to these groups of women to do their work. So notice the textures, notice the intricacy of what they are doing and their faith, their hope. So this one is just it's called cosecha, the harvest. When you're really, really hungry, right? Not just for food, but for so much, right? The harvest. This next one is called Mujeres Trabajando. Anybody want to translate?
Working women.
Yes, working women or women working. And it's about them, about how it is that they are transforming their community, because what has begun happening is that as these works make their way out into the world, the rest of us want what they are seeing. And so we've been able to raise many, many funds by buying the artwork, commissioning the artwork from the women and sending the money back to Peru for them to be able to do this. And so in this work, you see the women, they're doing different things for their town, for their community. They're bringing water to the community. They're cleaning it up. They're doing all kinds of different things so that they can have a better and more lovely life for all of them. So the women working, and of course you're going to notice the plethora of churches. That part of what they would love to have is that, multiple places of worship where they can gather and where they can pray together. I'm going to start this one in the back here. Now, you're going to see also that there's a little pocket in the back. And on the bigger pieces like this one, you will get a little statement from the artist. So I'm actually going to take that and read it to you, right? But notice the church. The artist says, and very often these are kind of phonetic because they have very little education. So in this piece, we can see women working. They are trash collectors. They are water bearers. They are driving the trucks of the trash. And others who live in the town who come out to work in the market. Notice all of this about their doing and the transformation that they're doing will bring to their community. And her name is Isabel Príncipe, which is a beautiful name. And the last one that I have for you is how they then envision their faith. Can you tell what that is? La da 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 da. Right? Silent night, holy night, right? Christmas. And this is their version of a creche, what we call a nacimiento, right? And representing the Christmas story is enormously important in all of the Spanish lands coming from Spain and around. And here they have, of course, baby Jesus and Mary and Joseph, who are very happy. You will see their faces. They're so happy. And then the angel and the star and the starry sky. Their town is there too. So the Holy Family is being born in their midst. And the other clue that we have to that is that they're bringing them stuff from the harvest. There's a woman, and she has a basket full of fruit. And then, of course, their animals, their own indigenous animals, are present there. They somehow are also part of this story. All of nature is kind of involved. The beautiful palm trees with their fruit. And then the wise men. En español, los reyes magos. The magical kings. The magical kings. And their clothing is sparkling. There's the idea of the three kings in the Spanish imagination is that they connect us to the enchantment. They're kind of that line that all of these artists have shown us between what is material and what is immaterial. They're magical, they're magic, they're enchanted. And their presence is what brings then just this overwhelming riches of heaven to present to the Christ child with the riches of earth. And as they have shown us, right, this joining of what's transcendent and what